So I think, Dean Fisher, thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this incredible panel. Thank you all of you for being here. And if you want, let's get started.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Elizabeth, am I all right? Are we on now, right now? I'm assuming we are. Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lee Fisher. I am the Dean of Cleveland Marshall College of Law at Cleveland State University in Cleveland, Ohio, the home of the last night's presidential debate, if you don't know where Cleveland is. We have 5 extremely distinguished panelists today, and I couldn't be more excited. But first, I want to thank our sponsors. We do that because they have gone out of their way to make this Global Cleveland Sister Cities Conference successful. That's Platform Brewing, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Sunnyside Group, Ulmer and Byrne, Rotary Club of Cleveland, Eaton, Taiwan Sister Cities, Margaret Wong and Associates, Team Neo, Peace Corps, and 12 Literary Arts. Now let's go to the panelists. We have 5 panelists, 2 of whom I do know. The first I do know, Kazatchkine, well known throughout the world, and I was privileged to host him, thanks to Global Cleveland, at our law school about a year ago when he dazzled our students and talked about his life and his career and his views. Kazatchkine is a constitutional rights and national unity advocate and a Gold Star father. He migrated to the United States in 1980 and attended Harvard Law School for his LLM degree. He lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he's the author of 3 books, including Founding Documents of the United States of America and This is Our Constitution. You'll notice that he is joining us through FaceTime. He overcame technological obstacles and found an alternative, which shows his creativity, because this is not easy to do a kind of conference like this. We all had some difficulty getting in. So I actually applaud him for doing it this way so he could join us. Our second panelist is Eva Lazarova. Isa is the executive director of the Institute for Public Environment Development, a think tank nonprofit organization operating in Bulgaria, and she is speaking to us today from Bulgaria. Next, from Brussels, right now, Natacha Kazatchkine is responsible for developing analysis and advocacy strategies on EU policies to protect and promote human rights and the rule of law within Europe. Next, from the UK, Alfiaz Viaya is the coordinator of the European Parliament Anti-Racism Diversity Intergroup. You should know all personal family emergency, so he may have to leave us early. And I wanted to let you know that it's no fault of his own, but he has to focus on personal matters, and I understand that. Last but not least is my longtime friend right here in Cleveland, who just returned from 6 years practicing law in Brazil and is with the global firm of Jones Day. Sanjiv is fluent in Portuguese, Spanish, German, French, and Hindi, 5 more languages than I am proficient in. He has worked for over 3 decades on groundbreaking cross-border M&A, that's mass mergers and acquisitions, transactions in Latin America, Europe, and Asia. Today, we're going to be talking about civil society and the growing threat of ultra-nationalism. We're all concerned about the health and well-being of our civil society worldwide. And these 5 panelists will discuss their efforts to ensure the rights of minorities, women, and those marginalized by ultra-nationalist tendencies, and how they have done it, what steps they've taken to ensure a welcoming, healthy, safe, and thriving national climate for each person. And so what I'm going to do is begin with introductory questions for each of them, but understandably, each of them should also feel free to make some introductory remarks even before they answer my question. My first question is for Kazatchkine, but I no longer see him on FaceTime. Khizr, are you still with us?
Yep.
Khizr, can you hear me right now? I don't know that he can hear me. Do you hear me?
Just fine.
Okay, terrific. We're going to go to you first. So our first panelist, as you can see, is from FaceTime. And here's my question, Khizr. You've been involved in a project called Communities Overcoming Extremism, That was in response to the violent extremist far-right rallies in Charlottesville that actually were referred to last night in the presidential debate. Can you share the results of that project? Go ahead, Khizr, you're on now.
Dean Fisher, thank you. Thank you for your kindness and your warmth. I am sustained by the reception, by the encouragement, and your leadership, Joe Simperman, Elizabeth Kuma, with all these technical difficulties. I am sustained by by joining you and by other panelists. I am also grateful to the board of Global Cleveland. I speak to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, and what a timely and much needed conference on extremism, on communities dealing with extremism is taking place. I am very much heartened and encouraged. I wish to start my sharing of my experience from Charlottesville for the benefit of our audience, because I know there is amazing leadership from Europe and from United States with us. I remember 11th and 12th of August of 2017, I was in Charlottesville when Charlottesville faced extremism, intolerance, and my daughter, I call her my daughter, Heather Hare, was killed, was murdered. And I wish to recite a couple of words from her mother. Upon the passing of Heather Hare, her mother said, "She died doing what was right. My heart is broken, but I am forever proud of her. Susan Bro." This is what her mother said. I want you to remember these words. And then I remember literally every time I get an opportunity to speak what took place at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And I always recite those words. We remember them by our actions. So my words and my actions are dedicated in that spirit, that we remember them by our actions. Since August of 2017, a lot has taken place in Charlottesville. And I cite these examples to show the world that we believe in rule of law. We believe in our Constitution. Dean Fisher, you have taught us so well. You have given us the belief in our rule of law, that we went and we knocked at the doors of our court system after these violent rallies took place in 2017 in Charlottesville. To make this long story short, we were within short period of time, we were able to get a consent order in which those who came to attack Charlottesville, to threaten the peaceful community, agreed. And I would implore your audience to please, I don't have much time to read you the entire consent order, but consent order is so affirming of our faith in our rule of law, in our courts, in our judicial system, in our rule of law, that your faith will be refreshed, that there is a peaceful alternative to these violent protests and extremism. In the consent order, the Pennsylvania Lightfoot militia and all those extremists that came to attack Charlottesville agreed never to return to Charlottesville ever, or incite anyone else to come to threaten the community, and so on. It is so reaffirming of our faith in our Constitution and our rule of law. The second thing that I wish to share that happened after Charlottesville, that again reaffirms our faith in our judicial system, is that Georgetown Law Center dedicated its resources, which is available to everyone. And the title of that resource is Prohibiting Private Armies at Public Rallies, because that had become a trademark of these extremists. And in that study, there are all 50 states, because peace and order is a local matter, is a state matter. In that study, there are constitutions of all 50 states, the relevant sections of all 50 states of the United States of America, which prohibit the activity that took place in Charlottesville and other places. I implore your audience to look for it, read it. Wherever I have traveled, I have taken that study with me, and local authorities, state attorney generals, governors, mayors have been enlightened and encouraged to read the study and make use of it before granting any permit for such rallies that took place. I say all this is to show an example that there is a constitutional, legal way of dealing with extremism. It is not going anywhere. It is with us, as you saw the example of and I apologize to be political. I hope Cleveland is recovered from last night's display of cowardice of our president not condemning extremists. Communities coming together to deal with extremism. There is an amazing effort in various communities that is taking place. I am part of some. I proudly joined the communities overcoming extremism initiated by ADL, and other peaceful communities also joined. And there had been an amazing reception of that activity. So there is more peaceful people than more violent people. We need to build our voice. We need to come together. We have the law, we have the Constitution, we have the democratic institutions on our side, which grant us the venue to address our concerns and discourage this violent and threatening display of hate and extremism. I remember I was told on the 11th and 12th of August not to get out of my house in Charlottesville. I had ordered some books that I went to pick up. I thought I will not go towards downtown, I'll go through the university. And the reason I cite this is that how threatened I was by the display of those hateful slogans. I took a shortcut through the university. I was stuck because traffic was blocked, and I realized that I could not take a U-turn. The street was so narrow. So I rolled the window down for fresh air, and I heard the ugliest slogans that I have never heard. I thought we had defeated this neo-Nazi and this fascism. in Second World War and left it and buried it in Germany, but it rose its head in Charlottesville again. I was afraid for my safety. I rolled the windows up and I slouched on my feet to not be so visible. I was watching something taking place that I had never thought that America and the peaceful world sacrificed so much to defeat this hate and defeat these neo-Nazis, but they had risen their head again in Charlottesville. Finally, the procession went to the sacred grounds of the University of Virginia, where my sons had studied and had learned how to serve, how to defend democracy, how to defend this nation. And then the rest of the world saw what took place in Charlottesville. I cite these examples and I cite the word to remember what took place in Pittsburgh, that tree of life, that we remember them by our actions. My every action is in the memory of those innocent people that were victim of this extremism. So I end my comment with this reminder that there are constitutional, regardless of cowardice of our leadership, there are legal, there are institutions that support us, there are constitutional and legal ways to deal with extremism and deal and discourage this. But this time, the United States is going to bury this extremism so deep that it will never rise its head. It continues, it did in 50s, McCarthy era, and it has risen again. But this time we are going to deal with it finally so that it will never rise its head again, either here or in Europe. Thank you very much.
Kazatchkine, thank you. You are eloquent as always. And there are many takeaways from what you said, but perhaps the most important one is that we remember them by our actions, not just our words. So thank you for that. And I hope to have time to go back to each of you after you give your opening remarks. I want to go next to Alfiaz Viaya because he'll have to leave us a little early this morning. He is speaking to us from the UK. And Alfiaz, you've spent time studying US politics and are deeply embedded in EU politics. Can you share some of your transatlantic work on coalition building to slow the spread of far-right extremist groups and ideology?
Much, Dean, and thank you to everyone at Global Cleveland. It's an honor to speak alongside the other distinguished panelists. For also letting me go first, I have a slight family emergency, so I will have to probably leave afterwards. Thank you for everyone for tuning in and for wanting to listen to what we have to say. I think on this panel, the more distinguished European speakers are after me in Natacha and Ava, but I will try to talk about the work that I've been doing. So I was managing the equivalent of a caucus, a cross-party grouping in the European Parliament against racism, where I worked a lot with Natacha and the Open Society Foundations. And what we're seeing in the transatlantic space, but across the world, is a worrying state of democracy, right? So Freedom House reports have showed that in established democracies are in the 14th consecutive year of deterioration in political rights and civil liberties. We're seeing global fragmentation, especially around liberal leadership. We're actually seeing the coming together of autocratic leaders, whether it's President Trump, leaders in Brazil and South America, whether it's President Modi in India and others and like Xi Jinping in China, but also in Europe. We're seeing these autocratic, anti-democratic leaders. And what's even more concerning in Europe is that a lot of these leaders actually fought in the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s against communism in Central and Eastern Europe. And now they are, guilty of the same kind of totalitarian mindset of, limiting rights and individual liberties. And we're seeing that, this absence of global leadership, we're seeing the US pull out of international institutions and international fora, reducing its funding to the UN. But also, we're seeing that other countries are following suit. And the European Union is trying to, continue with its support and, lift up along with some other countries. But when the main country, the United States, along with some of its new allies, starts to remove themselves from these institutions, they weaken the same institutions that we created post-World War II, as Mr. Khan said. We created those institutions after the aftermath of World War II, and now we're betraying those same institutions. Those institutions that have given us our power have, allowed the United States, Canada, and the European countries to have hegemonic power and to decide the trajectory of geopolitics. And now we're actually turning our back on the institutions that we've created. And, this is just going to continue. And I don't mean to be pessimistic, but, we're moving to a multipolar world. And as you move from a hegemon to a multipolar world, you see that, with the rise of China, India, by 2100, Nigeria will be in the top 5 countries because of its population growth. You will see more and more of these issues happening. And unfortunately, you also see more of these anti-democratic countries. We're moving away from, the multilateralism that, was after World War II and, dominated the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to protectionism, right? And this is happening at the same time as we see a rise in infotech and biotech, but then we also see the dangerous part of this, infotech revolution, with disinformations, platforms, the power of these platforms, and how actually, we're seeing the worst excesses of this new technological revolution. And we only have to see with this pandemic that we're living in a health pandemic, but we're also living in a disinformation pandemic. And we see, how social media giants and platforms have been used by autocratic leaders to reach and, to suppress the vote. We saw how the Trump campaign in 2016 focused on suppressing the votes of, African Americans, liberals, and women votes by targeting, Hillary Clinton's past. And, we'll do that again. And we're also seeing the rise of China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran interfering in this presidential election, but we've seen it in the European elections. So we're also seeing that this change in the world order is coming at the same time as we're seeing a change in technology and the rise of infotechnology. And now with the global pandemic, the rise in biotechnology as well. And so this is a very concerning situation for democracy because our democracy is changing as we move into more of a digital phase, but we're also seeing that, we're seeing the rise of autocratic leaders and these kind of political leaders across the world. And it's very worrying. So, what can we do? And I think we have to be careful because we're really at the edge of going back to the nation's tribes and religion and beliefs. And we're seeing that happening pretty much across Europe and North America, apart from Canada. And how do we prevent that tide from happening? Well, I think there are a few different ways that we've worked in the transatlantic space, and maybe I can just quickly share in my intervention, is that first of all, we have to do a form of process of value sorting. We have to sort our values and see what are important to us and how we communicate those values to the general public. And then that comes to how we remodel our society. We've had a liberal world order since World War II that, through these institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions we've created, and, Europe benefited from the Marshall Plan. But how should our society be in 2020 when we have a digital revolution, an infotech, biotech revolution alongside these changes? So how can we society? And this is where, for liberals, it's about trying to create a vision that, is appealing to the public, but also, that we can generally are convinced of by ourselves. We need to have that conviction. And unfortunately, the reason why the right and the far right have managed to, move forward with their narrative is that they have a strong conviction in their narrative. And it's for us liberals, and I say us, I mean, I hope all of us on this panel, but that it's for us to create that vision and be convinced by our vision. We need to show leadership. We need to be proud of our leadership and proud for the values that we stand, whether it's for minorities, for LGBTQ people, for Muslim, for Jewish people, but also for people on lower incomes. And, we need to be proud of policies of ensuring everyone in society has equal opportunity. And of course, that means, in a foreign policy lens, in a transatlantic space, pushing back soft power, re-engaging with these international institutions, looking at rule of law, democracy, human rights. And, the pandemic, I think, has hopefully maybe taught us that, we're in a country like China, which failed to suppress the virus. Well, I mean, if it had freedom, transparency, and democracy, it would have been easier for China to respond quickly and effectively to the virus. And the same thing you can see in the United States. The fact is that you have such a disjointed government in the United States, and, in some cases in Europe as well, that our response was limited by, the fact that we don't have this transparency, or we don't have this accountability in our institutions anymore. So we need to rebuild that transparency, that freedom, that belief, that accountability. We also need to, as people who are liberals, we need to look at different levels of the executive, right? So, a lot of our focus has been on the top positions, but actually democracy is about the different levels. It's about holding, being on the board of your school council. It's about the judiciary. It's about, members of parliament, your local councilman like Joe Superman. We need to look at all kinds of levels and not just get fixated by the very high level. There are good things happening, and we need to see how we can support those efforts at the micro level and at different levels, right? And I think, again, this is where the right have managed to have conviction in their beliefs and strategy, because if you see in the United States, they're focused on holding the Senate and, with the filibuster, preventing any kind of legislation which will prevent a Democrat president from being able to do much. But also they managed to keep on chipping away at the judiciary and keep on getting judges in. So it's even as though the demographic changes in the United States, they still managed to control the legislative and the legislative agenda and the judiciary, and prevent us from making those changes. And that is because they have a conviction, and that means that we need to look at different levels in society, but also have the conviction in our belief. And just in my final 2 minutes, I would also say that looking at different levels, the city level is very important, and that's why this conference is important, bringing cities together. That to give an example, in Italy, there was 2 particular cities close next to each other when we had the major outbreak in Europe, an initial outbreak in Italy, and just the different governance in each city prevented one city from having a mass outbreak and another city being completely inundated by the virus. And actually, so it shows at city level to have good governance at the city level and to build that leadership up slowly up the levels. And then I think some of the other things we need to focus on is, of course, the media, to make sure we have internal and external media pluralism. In the United States, you have this external media pluralism where you have different news channels with different opinions, like CNN to Fox. In the UK, we have this internal media pluralism, which is the BBC, which represents different news opinions. But it's important to have that media pluralism and to have that freedom of the media. And unfortunately, in Europe, we're seeing that slowly being eroded. And I'm sure Natacha and Ava will come to that. And then I think it's also looking at the opportunities of looking at opportunities in terms of educating voters about their participation in politics and society. A lot of people of color that I've worked with, just don't know enough about how to register and about their voting rights. And it's about educating people on that and become active on those issues. And then my final point would be around the digital space. I spoke a lot about this challenge that we're seeing globally of autocrats and against democracy, but it's happening at the same time as we see an infotech and biotech revolution. And I think what's going to be very important for us is how we deal with that infotech and biotech revolution, because that's directly going to impact minorities who I've been concerned with. And in that sense, what I would say that we're doing a lot of work on trying to make sense of artificial intelligence, big data, and trying to look at platform power, accountability, how we can ensure that everyone has access to that digital revolution, but actually it's not used in ways that harm people. And I think, we should be looking at an online harms regulator. We should be looking more closely at the duty of care media companies have, platforms have for their consumers, and we should also see the effects of monopolies on our society. As we know, monopolies are anti-democratic and actually eventually will affect the production and the consumer. And that's going to have a big role, because we see with Facebook that it's impossible for the state to be able to control Facebook and prevent some of the worst excesses of platforms like Facebook and Twitter and the hate that's spilled. And that we know that hate then leads to physical attacks, as we see in Pittsburgh, in San Diego. We saw it in Halle in Germany. In New Zealand, you saw it in Christchurch, that link between the digital space and the physical space, which then leads to extremism and deaths and violence on our streets. And and the worst part is that, and this is where I'll end, is, as Mr. Khan said, often that is coming from such a strong place, and it's also being backed up by our leadership. And unfortunately, in Europe and in the United States, we have political leaders who are actually condoning that violence and actually lighting the fuel for that violence to happen even more, and actually want to see this clash of civilizations, and I want to create this distrust and mistrust between communities and groups in society. And that's where I think we really need to focus our efforts, is on that political leadership, looking at different levels, looking at the different levels we can apply, education, and also the online space. Thank you very much. I hope I was in time.
You did. Thank you, Alfiaz. I truly appreciate it. We know you have to leave in a few minutes, but thank you for sharing that with us. And rejoining us just now technologically is Eva Lazarova from Bulgaria. Eva, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Eva?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can hear you. Okay, now, okay, I can hear you now. Okay.
Yes, I do.
I'm going to ask you. Okay, I'm going to hear you. I ask you a question, Eva, and that is, you're working to protect voter rights, especially minority voting rights.
Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge in Bulgaria today regarding the right to vote? And do you see parallels to here in the United States? Did you hear that?
Thank you for having me. And sorry. Yeah, I did.
Good. I hear you now. That's fine. Go ahead.
So thanks for having me, and sorry about the technical issues. Like in the United States, election debate since elections next year. And in my opinion, is the constant change of the electoral rules shortly election. Saying shortly, I mean that even less than change here. And all these in the electoral code. And this often in the voters, procedures they have to follow even during the election day. It also in a high percentage of invalid ballots, higher than the good standards of other European Union countries. Just for example, in the local elections last year, around 15% of the ballots were invalid. Just the right in
We're having some audio issues with Eva, as you can tell, but hopefully she'll be back with us in a second. Eva, can you hear us? Looks like we may have to skip Eva and come back to her because of her technological problems. So Eva, if you can hear me, we still want you back, but we're going to move on to Natacha while you try to figure out how to get back in. Natacha, first of all, thank you for joining us from Brussels today. The Open Society Foundation works to foster the respect for the rule of law. So can you share with us a couple projects you're working on that give you some hope right now?
Yes, thank you. Good morning to everyone. I'm extremely honored to be at this global conference with such distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for inviting us. And I'm very happy to be there somehow, even if virtually in the US, although, as you said, I'm sitting here in Brussels, in Belgium. At the Open Society Foundation's European Union Advocacy Office in Brussels, we indeed work as OSF as a whole for the respect of human rights and the rule of law. And we work more precisely on the situation in Europe. You asked me about projects that give me hope today. I think two advocacy projects I want to mention is the project on promotion of democracy, rule of law, and the project on the role of civil society in making that democracy vibrant, flourish, and grow. And these two projects give me hope. I will talk about that, promise. They also give me despair. And it is the articulation of these two, the despair and hope, the democracy, rising nationalism, and civil society on the other side, these articulations that I want to touch upon with you now. So from here in Europe, we have long thought that the USA was what we call a resilient democracy. And for many of us also, civil society, activism, you know, coming from the US is a real model. I mean, so many of my activist friends, you know, came transformed from trips they did in the US. With my own team, we went to visit our colleagues in Baltimore 2 years ago. And what we saw, the projects on the ground, the lessons we learned about advocacy, about campaigning, about grassroots organization and local activism, this was incredibly rich. I really want to say that to civil society today in the US. Don't forget that. This is extremely, extremely valuable. But as you all know, and much better than me, today we do realize that the US is facing many challenges to its democracy in a way we had never thought, I had never thought I would see. And what I want to say is that at this moment, important for the US, on the other side of the Atlantic, in Europe and in the European Union in particular, we are witnessing similar challenges when it comes to protecting and having a flourishing democratic space where civil society can operate freely and do its job and do what it wants to do, which is promote rule of law, speak out for the voiceless, and engage citizens in the public space. On the European continent, we probably underestimated the solidity of our democracy. This is something we're hearing more and more, but that is hitting Europe quite hard today, just like it's hitting other continents. When the European Union came around 60 years ago, it is interesting that at that moment, institutions, politicians, governments, civil society alike thought that entering this club was entering a safe haven, a place where human rights, democratic principles, and the subsequent free civic space were guaranteed, and where intimidation of judges constraints on NGOs, stigmatization of individuals, threats, even physical, were an old story or something of the past or something that's happening elsewhere. And as a consequence of that, what the European Union, and member states realize today is that they didn't build a solid protection mechanisms and shield to make sure that this rule of law is always protected, to make sure that civil society actors have the support, the funding, the protection, the enabling environment they need. To give you examples, there is no concept of human rights defender in Europe. This only applies for people working on human rights in organizations outside. There is no European fund to protect investigative journalists, although we've seen that some have been killed in the recent years within Europe. What is important to see is, and I want to put also on the table for our debate, is that at the same time, and this is also a trend we have in the US, the EU became what we've called this fortress, building more and more walls, in particular at its borders, and undermining the right to asylum, the right to move, to migrate, and turning its back on many people, in particular foreigners that were non-EU. And these policies, both this complacency towards its own system and lack of prevention and protective mechanisms, and policies that were getting tougher and tougher, especially in the area of migration, have given in and fueled the far right and the nationalism we've seen in Europe. Now, just to do the focus on civic space, civil society, as a Polish colleague put it, is, I think we can argue, one of the, if not the first victim of nationalism, civil society working for promotion of rule of law. And one country I've known best in terms of the situation on the ground is Hungary. And there you've seen independent civil society depicted as foreign agents, traitors to the nations, under foreign influence, working for money, being mercenaries, not caring for their people, not caring for their country. Their names have been vilified in pro-government media, offices have been, and laws, so we're talking about, a state that abides or says it abides by rule of law. Laws have been used, in fact, to curtail their activities, to tax them unduly in order to stop some of their work that the government found inappropriate or unhelpful for its own nationalistic propaganda. Civil society is a vast word. There's also, as part of this civil society, the whole group and community of academics, and and you're here, also in the field of academia, and free thinking, freedom of science, freedom of academic freedom, as we call it, has been under attack also very significantly in Hungary. You may have all heard about the fate of the Central European University that was forced out Budapest by a law enacted by the European government. There are more attacks going on and continuing against boards of universities, professors, and just now, as we're talking in the last month, they've been very big protests by the famous Arts and Film University and Academy in Budapest. Similarly, civil society, it's also about the media and the journalists and access to information and news to the public. The media space has been reduced dramatically in Hungary, with outlets being taken up by ticons and businessmen close to the government, and people forced to either self-censor, become pro-government voice piece, work on something they dislike, or move on, go to another job, get closed, or start something, some independent, news agency, on their own with private donations, with no access to actual public radio and public TV, where they could bring another voice to the public debate and the propaganda. So this image is bleak, and the tactic of such autocrats is clear. They want to deliberately and systematically, close, silent dissent. And what does this mean for civil society? Civil society is, in fact, the watchdog on unchecked power. So in such a situation, what happens? A lot of its energy becomes conducted towards defending itself. And I'll be also happy to hear from the US how this feels. When you are, constantly having to prove yourself, justify what you're doing, respond to attack, or find strategies not to respond, not to rebut. And all this is taking a lot of time and energy and diverting from the work that's more than ever extremely useful to help those that need assistance. So these trends and the fact that the European Union, I won't go on to that now, but you may have questions on that, is not stopping those trends or not succeeding in stopping them. It questions today for all of us in Europe how much the European Union is really this community of values it says it is. But to end on the note of hope, I want to share that in this context, civil society may be the first victims, but they're also the first guardians, and they have stood up. What we have seen on the projects we've worked that gives us hope are many things. First of all, I want to stress the solidarity. The solidarity between civil society groups, between individuals is extremely important. We've seen NGOs come together across borders, across Europe to support each other, to bring their voice, to help their neighbor, to come in jointly with to even the EU, to Brussels, as we say it, and collectively make their case and call for respect of civil society. We've seen civil society fight against exclusion and nationalism with campaigns to defend those who criminalize solidarity with migrants and refugees. And there's been a huge movement, people hosting refugees and asylum seekers in their home, young people going to Lesbos. I have friends who've been working on islands in Greece for many years now. We've seen people in France defying the authorities with civil disobedience and creating some new ground for what is now called in France the fraternity duty. Civil society is also part and influencing the debate. It's still possible in Europe. And I think what Mr. Khan was saying, I hope it's still possible also in the US. We're not in the situation that I mentioned in one member state. We can have access to some policymakers, and civil society is getting more and more organized and able and capable of doing that. Today, the European Commission, so the European Union, released the first ever report on rule of law, looking at every member state of the European Union. And the contribution of civil society to this report, bringing the information from the ground, bringing the reality out, has been immense. At least on the countries that I've worked on, I know that. So there is hope. There is hope that civil society can be a force of progress, can be a force that, as Mr. Khan says, uses the rule of law instruments we have, these democratic checks and balances we have, to secure and protect human rights of all, go to the courts, litigate, come out in the media, campaign. And for that, we need a very clear and clearer commitment and money and action from the European level to give them space to act freely. Thank you very much.
Natacha, thank you very much for being a watchdog and guardian of civil society. You're a wonderful example of that. You also, by the way, have the best microphone I've heard of any panel so far. So whatever that equipment is, send it to us and let us know what that is, because I'm impressed. Those headphones and microphone really work well. Sanjiv will be getting to you in a minute, I promise, but I want to give a chance for Eva to finish her remarks because she's going in and out, and right now she's in. So let's take advantage of the fact that we can see Eva. Eva, you were talking to us about your work to protect voting rights in Bulgaria. Please go ahead.
Sorry about audio technical issues. I just want to tell you more about the similarities between the goals that I see in the United States. What I have described previously seems to me very similar to the process that is undergoing in the United States, in particular for those presidential elections. To further explain, you all probably very well know how President Trump claims that the US Postal Service is in crisis, which will affect the voting by mail. From my point of view, such potential to seriously undermine the trust in the electoral process and disrupt the work of the administration that is responsible for its organization and the conduct of the upcoming elections. There is no absentee in Bulgaria, but it seems as a very convenient practice in the times of the COVID-19 pandemic. And limiting the opportunity to cast your ballot that way may lead to a lower turnout. Later on, this can have a crucial importance on the way Americans perceive and recognize the newly elected whoever who is. On the lower turnout can affect national image, ability to influence external affairs. And just a few thoughts on what everyone right? As the whole topic of the I did not mention the role that the ultra-nationalist parties have in our public environment. It is obvious rhetoric is widely spread nowadays in the political and public debate, not only in Bulgaria, as we all heard. And such rhetoric is often not based on any logical evidence or data, but it gains traction and from the voters. Having in mind the picture, we should all reconsider not only the importance of the electoral systems and the procedures in our countries, but the ways we can counteract the attempts of such representatives to position of power and make decisions that are affecting the of our liberal democracy, trade, of the international and so on. So thanks for technical issue, and I'm open for any comment, further discussion.
Thank you, Eva. Appreciate it very much. Last but not least is Sanjiv Kapur, my friend, who is a partner with the global law firm of Jones Day. Sanjiv, I want to ask you about the Laredo Project, a special project that you're involved with, as well as the minority-majority context of Brazil, where you worked for the last 6 years. The U.S. is on its way to becoming a majority-minority country, and Cleveland, Ohio, already is. So how can the Brazilian reality inform the multiracial experience here in the United States?
Well, thank you, Lee. It's good to see you again.
I think you're on mute.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you, Lee. It's good to see you again. And,
I can hear you.
And I want to thank again Global Cleveland, the board of which I've recently joined, for sponsoring this conference, as well as the Cleveland Public Library, which is known as the People's University. And libraries play a very important role in civil society, and I'm glad to see that they're promoting this conference. Before I start, I want to say that although I'm a partner at Jones Day, the views I'm expressing are those of myself and not necessarily those of the institution Jones Day, of which I'm a part of. As we've seen today from the first talk of Mr. Khan through Eva's talk, the theme today is rule of law and what can the government NGOs and others do. And I guess I would like to take a few minutes to talk about what private individuals and corporations can do by giving you two examples. One is what Jones Day is involved in the Laredo project. And the second is to talk about my experiences in Brazil. In Brazil, as Lee mentioned, we're talking about a society where the majority of the individuals are of African descent. And yet, in my practice there for 6 years, when I go to a law firm, I don't see, rarely do I see a lawyer who's of African descent. And not only that, I don't see secretaries, for example, in law firms that are of African descent. So there's obviously something wrong there. And I think the good news is that the Brazilian society, in spite of all of its problems and a president who many would say is not very sympathetic to this cause of racial equality, Brazil is making progress. And so I'd like to touch on both of these issues. First, what individuals can do here in the US by giving an example of what we at Jones Day have been doing. And I'm gonna share some pictures just so that I can provide some context of what Jones Day is doing. So can everybody see the slide that I've posted, or hopefully? Jones Day back in 2017.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Back in 2017, the partners and other lawyers and members of the firm were concerned about the treatment that asylum seekers were receiving on the border with Mexico, back down by the border in the United States. And we actually went and set up an office in Laredo, Texas. And what I'm showing there on the slide right now is, in effect, the bridge that spans the border between the United States and Laredo, Texas. And you can see Mexico's on the other side, and there's a bridge over which immigrants and asylum seekers can walk over and come into the United States. And what you can't see on the other side is that there is a hotel called La Posada, and we have set up an office in that hotel, which is manned by lawyers, legal assistants, and others who come in on a weekly basis to man its operations. And I'll just provide some additional pictures just to give you a context. So that's the bridge. I think there's another, let me see if oh yeah, here's another picture of the bridge. And then finally, this is one of our offices in the hotel itself, where you're seeing a number of lawyers who have gotten together to discuss some cases. So as I mentioned, basically, we have this office that we've opened back in March of 2017. We've had about over 1,000 lawyers and other timekeepers from Jones Day staffing the office, as well as about 20 private corporations and other law firms have come in and helped staff this office to help asylum seekers basically understand their rights. And unfortunately, what we've seen in this time period since 2017 is a change in the law. Some would say a change in the law that doesn't necessarily comport with the rule of law, with the processes of the rule of law. For example, when we started the process, women and others who were being tortured or assaulted by their spouses or boyfriends or by gangs were able to come in and claim a credible fear which entitled them to asylum. And then back in 2017, the Attorney General overruled, basically, in effect, what were the holdings of the Bureau of Immigration Appeals, which entitled people to seek asylum. But nevertheless, there are opportunities to help these individuals. And we, on a weekly basis, although it's been somewhat curtailed now with COVID-19, have been talking to asylum seekers. Many of them were women and children, Most of them in the beginning were from Central America, but in light of what's happened in the last few years and some of the efforts that the Mexican government has done, we see less and less folks from Central America. And interestingly, 2/3 of the people who are now seeking assistance are coming from either Cuba or Venezuela. But we talk to them, we try to assess their cases, and obviously we can't take on everybody. I mean, we're talking to hundreds and thousands of people. So we try to find the best cases, the cases where people are really in grave danger. Their women and children are being raped, being kidnapped, being persecuted, and have a credible fear. And we're hoping that we can do something to help them. What has impeded our efforts in part has been this new program called the MPP, Migrant Protection Program, which has basically said that these individuals who previously, when they came to the US, were housed in detention centers, now are sent back to Mexico. And along the border between the United States and Mexico, basically it's a lawless area. The Mexican government has basically given over the territory in de facto method over to drug dealers and terrorists. And so it's a very unsafe place. These asylum seekers are sent back and basically being kidnapped, raped. And so, as an individual, I don't know who's more to blame, whether it's the Mexican government or the US government, which is permitting this to happen. And we are basically sending, when I say we, the US government is sending over these asylum seekers who are already facing problems, facing all sorts of personal security issues in their countries, back to Mexico, where they're being preyed on by these drug dealers and other folks who are basically kidnapping them and extorting money from them. And so we are in this difficult situation, trying to, we and like I said, 20 other private companies who work with us, as corporations that I'm sure many of you heard of, banks and other leading corporations in the United States, as well as law firms are taking on these cases. Just to give you an idea, we do believe we've had an impact. We've taken on about 100 clients with, in about 70 cases. And normally in the process, when people seek asylum, only 1% of the folks are successful. In the situations where we as a law firm are representing these individuals, we have a 94% success rate. So representation is important, where if you can emphasize to the courts, the importance of rule of law, due process, and I think that's something that we all as lawyers have an obligation to take actions to represent individuals and to support and propel the rule of law and due process. So that's one point I'd like to make. The second point, as I mentioned, is that Brazil is a society in which I've been living for the last 6 years and actually been doing business for the last 15 years. And it's a great society. People are very open, very friendly. They're very welcoming. In fact, most of you would be surprised that Brazil is probably the multicultural society in the world in terms of folks from Asia, Africa, Europe, the Middle East. It truly is a multicultural society. And yet, it's a situation, a country where a majority of the folks are of African descent, and Brazil was very late in the process of abolishing slavery. They didn't abolish slavery until 1890. And as a result, what we've seen is a very segregated society where, unfortunately, most of the economic power is controlled by the white population or the people who are not of African American descent. And what has impeded, in effect, change there is the fact that in Brazil, you never saw the racial hatred and animus that we saw here in the United States. There was no Bull Connor, recently at least, who was, sicking dogs or spraying people with water or making even making sort of the statements we heard about last night with the boys or whatever. There's very little of that in Brazil. People are very respectful for the most part. And so people have sort of just accepted the situation, even though it's not a fair situation where the majority of the population isn't participating in the economy to the extent they should. And so, but what is encouraging is, at least in the law firms and other major corporations, is that they've seen what's happening in the world, and they've realized that diversity is important, that you need to make sure that there's widespread opportunity for all in order for society to be successful economically and politically. And little by little, your diversity training has sort of become the norm. The law firms and other corporations have training on implicit race bias and other things. And so I guess I'd like to add, say that there are encouraging changes occurring both in Brazil and in the United States that can help counter some of this ultra-nationalism and promote the rule of law and democracy and due process.
Sanjiv, thank you very much. Even though we've gone over our time and therefore unfortunately don't have time for interaction with our audience, and I apologize for that, it's both the benefit and the curse of having 5 excellent panelists. I do want to give each of you, before we conclude our panel today, the opportunity to give us a takeaway. 1, 2, or 3 sentences that you think is important for people to know and remember based upon what you told us today. Eva, because I don't want to lose you, I'm going to go with you first, and then we'll go to Natacha and then back to Sanjiv. So Eva, if you can hear me, what do you want people to remember from your presentation today?
Please go the fact that the populist rhetoric be more, feel the solidarity that the civil society can present to all citizens in our countries.
Thank you, Eva. I appreciate that very much. And thank you for taking the time, and thank you for being so persistent for trying to connect with us today. Khizr Khan is back with us through FaceTime. Khizr, I was just asking everyone if they could give us a final takeaway, something to remember from your presentation today, since we don't have the opportunity to have interaction with our audience. So please go ahead. I see your lips moving, but I don't hear you.
On camera, but
there we go.
All participants, it is such joining hands that is required for civil society to prevail. Remember, never underestimate the impact of your work, regardless of what corner of the world you are performing, you are supporting the civil society, the rule of law. It has amazing impact. Never underestimate. That is my few words to conclude. I am so grateful to Global Cleveland, its leadership, and of course, Dean Fisher, your kindness, your warmth, your encouragement, and the words of our participants. So heartening. Thank you very much.
Khizr Khan, thank you for the power of your work. It's compelling and inspiring. Thank you very much. Let's go next to Natacha, who, by the way, can you share us what kind of microphone and headphone you have, because it's phenomenal. What is that, you know?
I don't know.
I don't know what it is, but send me an email because I want to buy one of those. It's impressive. Go ahead, give us the takeaway.
I think it's quite classic. No, my main takeaway is to say a different one, because I love the ones that were said before. I would say, don't leave, don't leave them alone. The people that need you and the governments, that are taking these policies, check on them, continue, raise your voice. That's what I would say.
Don't leave them alone. Be a guardian and a watchdog like you, right? That's great. And last but not least, Sanjiv, a takeaway.
I would say that rule of law is not only a responsibility, promoting rule of law is not only the responsibility of governments and NGOs, but of each of us, each individual and private corporations. And actually the private sector can play a very important role in that process.
I can't think of a better takeaway than that the rule of law is all of our obligation. and we all have to be guardians and watchdogs, and to make sure that what we do is, as Khizr said, that we remember them not just by our word, but by our action. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Sorry we went a little over, but that's because we had phenomenal panelists. Thank you again to our sponsors, and thank you again, of course, to Global Cleveland for putting together this phenomenal Sister Cities Conference 2020. Signing off. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Everyone. And remember that you can continue to join sessions through 2 o'clock today and starting again at 9:30 in the morning through Friday at 4 p.m. where we're going to have a naturalization ceremony as well. And we are partnering with Anisfield for some incredible authors. So it's a really full few days here. We really appreciate you. I hope you meet somebody new today. And I hope you come away thinking, boy, I got to get to Cleveland.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.